Max Brooks is a non-resident senior fellow with the Brent Scowcroft Center on International Security's Art of the Future project. Mr. Brooks is a New York Times best-selling author. His fiction, which is undeniably entertaining, works to raise awareness on the issues of disaster preparedness, crisis management, and survival for the common reader, all under the thematic guise of a zombie apocalypse. He has devoted much of his life to the study and development of anti-ghoul security, culminating in a genuine interest in the fundamentals and logistics that go into keeping our world safe from natural and man-made disaster threats. Mr. Brooks worked as a writer for Saturday Night Live, and after working for the BBC in Great Britain and East Africa, Brooks began writing The Zombie Survival Guide. Brooks's New York Times bestseller, World War Z, An Oral History of the Zombie War, has been made into a major motion picture starring Brad Pitt. The book tells the story of the world's desperate battle against the zombie threat with a series of first-person accounts as told by the author, by various characters around the world. Publishers Weekly calls the novel surprisingly hard to put down, and I think he's perfect to close out Mad Scientist. Please welcome him.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a little long bio, right? But I understand everyone's had these long bios over the course of this symposium. But I get it now. I finally understand. I was sitting for 2 days listening to these resumes, and I'm like, okay, I get it. And then I sort of figured it out. Okay, all these big resumes are answering your big question. Who the hell are you? You're thinking, my time is precious, my job is dangerous, why am I listening to you? And that's an excellent question. I don't have the tremendous academic credentials of some of these people here. I have just a little piddly master's degree from American University, which pretty much all I learned is if you're stuck in the blizzard of '96, you better have lived in a district that Marion Barry was plowing. I don't have a tremendous military background. All I have is less than a year of ROTC, in which pretty much all I did, at least all I remember, is throwing up after PT, which actually, when you think about it, is more military experience than anybody running for president. But what I do bring here is a unique perspective. And it's a perspective born of the fact that I have one foot in this world and one foot in entertainment, in the pop culture world. And I think it gives me a unique lens in which to judge the ideas that we've seen presented over the last 2 days. And they've all been amazing ideas, but not all of them. Flying motorcycles, really? Really? Did you not see Return of the Jedi? It was space-age technology defeated by Stone-Age teddy bears. Which, don't be too hard on Dr. Rice, because he still has the balloons, which are going to do wonders for American power projection until somebody invents the bow and arrow. But like I said, I've heard a lot of amazing ideas. And to quote the great American philosopher-poet Eddie Murphy, none of them are worth a warm bucket of hamster vomit if you can't communicate them to your boss. And by your boss, I don't mean Chairman of the Joint Chiefs or SecDef or the President. What I mean is the American people, the American voter. And that's what I'm going to talk to you here today. That's what I've been talking about for, I don't know, the decade that I've been going to these, is the complete divorce between the American people and those tasked with protecting them. You know, it's painfully obvious. I don't have any slides, but if I did, it would be that warfighter that we've seen. He'd be over here, and over here would be Larry the Cable Guy. Larry the Cable Guy would just be like, and that would be it. And it's painfully obvious to me that this divide is getting worse. And I think you all know this. This is not news. But I think that most people, when they think of this break, this chasm, would look back to President Bush's speech right after 9/11. When he told the American people, all we needed to do was pray, hug your children, and participate in the economy. And most of the country, we went, what? Wait, no. What about John F. Kennedy? What about, we choose to go to the moon? We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. That's what we were looking for. But the truth is, you can't applaud President Kennedy for that speech any more than you can criticize President Bush. And you can't. You really can't. Because both these men were just politicians saying what they thought would resonate with the American people at the time. And if you bookend these two speeches, go to the moon, go to the mall. Okay, you're the one who's been doing this for the last 2 days. Time. People have been watching online, hearing about cyber warfare and the brain and the environment melting, and it's punctuated by this nasal whoopee cushion. Stand up. No, I'm serious. Stand up and face the camera. I want people to know who. No. We got time. Can't do it, can you? Just so you all know, that's it. Oh, what was I saying? Oh, yeah, something minor like the divorce between the American people and those tasked with protecting them. If you take these speeches, if you take go to the moon and go to the mall, you see this road that we've been traveling. And unlike all roads to hell, it's a road paved with good intentions. You know, it was multi-steps to get to this point, but none of them were bad, none of them were cynical. They all had good intentions in mind. And they started back in the 1950s, even before Kennedy, during the Korean War, when we got rid of war bonds. You know, we've had war bonds since the Revolution. And in the 1950s, we thought, well, you know what? Hey, we don't really need them anymore. We're flush with cash, and it's the greatest generation. They've done their part. Don't bother them. You know, let them watch this new invention, television. And the war's not that popular anyway, so let it slide. What we didn't realize at the time was we were giving up a critical bond between the individual and the larger whole. You know, war bonds aren't just financial, they're emotional. They're a way for every citizen, no matter who you are, what you do, where you are in the country, to make a contribution, to make a difference. And suddenly it was gone. That was it. Go watch TV. And that was nothing compared to the 1970s, which I think we're all thinking about this when we got rid of the draft. Now, that wasn't just good intentions. You could argue at the time, at least the thinking at the time, was it was essential. I mean, the force was broken after Vietnam, and I say this as a child of the post-Vietnam era. There was no morale, and drug addiction was everywhere, and junior officers were afraid of getting fragged by their own guys. So you could see the call for an abolition of the draft, not just from the American population, but also from within the military. And it was a really good idea, logical idea, that if you had a force of choice, a force that put on the uniform because they made that conscious decision, then therefore you would have a motivated force. The problem is, in doing that, you created a questioning vacuum in the general populace. Why put on the uniform? Why would anyone want to voluntarily put themselves in harm's way if they didn't have to? And so this narrative sort of grew out of it. And it's a narrative that I don't want to say, and I know you don't want to hear, but we all have to hear it. We have to be reminded of it. Outside of this room, outside of this beltway, outside of this bubble, the general narrative in the general population is that anybody who joins the military does so because either A, they're economically disadvantaged and it's their only way out, or B, they're somehow some war junkie that likes to blow stuff up. And by the way, that second narrative is only getting stronger when you see movies like Hurt Locker or you see scandals with soldiers like Lindy England. So that's there. And that's nothing compared to what happened in the 1980s, when I sort of came of age and became cognizant of the world I lived in, when the President of the United States, the chief executive of the government, told us government is not the solution to our problems, government is the problem. Well, that doesn't even make any sense. We're a republic. We're a self-governing people. We are the government. So if government is the problem, we're the problem? Now, that's nothing compared to what also happened in the 1980s, this fundamental shift to a state religion of worshiping the golden calf of the private sector. This notion that There is nothing that corporate America can't do quicker and better and cheaper than the bloated bureaucracy of the government. And sometimes, very true, but sometimes it's not. And if you doubt that, just talk to anyone who was at Vibrant Response. I was there. We've heard some scary lectures, but I've heard nothing in the last 2 days that has taken any amount of sleep away, like the talk I had with some folks from the Defense Logistics Agency. Now, wait, just let me back up. Everyone know Vibrant Response, what it is? Dr. Environment, Lucy, you know what that is? Vibrant Response is the Homeland nuclear defense scenario. It's if a terrorist sneaks a nuke into our city and sets it off, and all these, emergency responders, including the regular army. No, I figure no, but this is right up your alley because, and you'll see in a second, what I learned from what's called the Defense Logistics Agency was in the 70s, we used to have stockpiles of emergency supplies everywhere. But in the 1990s, because of cost effectiveness, we got rid of them. Now what happened was we stockpiled those supplies in case, Ivan nuked us. And that never happened, but if we had a tornado, hurricane, other natural disaster, we had pre-positioned supply depots we could draw from. And what's happened now is, in the name of cost effectiveness, we now buy them from the big box stores on the day we need them. The problem is the big box stores, they don't warehouse either because it's too expensive. They have to turn their stock over every 24 hours. So God forbid we have a natural disaster, which, as we both know, is going to get a lot worse, but we won't be able to deal with it because what happens when it occurs, and at that moment, Walmart is turning over its stock. And that really happened during Superstorm Sandy. I was watching Superstorm Sandy. I live on the West Coast. I was watching the East Coast sink. And my wife said to me, we've talked for a while about getting a generator. Now's the time to do it. And I said what all married men say, you're right. So I got in the car, go to the store, no generators. No generators at the Home Depot, nothing. I turned to the guy working there. I said, what gives? He goes, oh, FEMA took them all. So they're all gone, along with a lot of other emergency supplies flowing from the West Coast and the Midwest and the Great Plains all to the East Coast. What if we'd had an earthquake? What if we'd had a tsunami? What if we'd had the event, the nuclear event that keeps us all up at night? What if that had happened? In the name of cost effectiveness and efficiency, a lot of Americans are going to die. And that's not the worst thing that happened in the 1990s. The worst thing that happened, especially to the American military, is the culture of the yellow ribbon. Pardon my language, but those bullshit empty gestures and phrases like, I support our troops. How? You heard that. You keep hearing this. I support our troops. If anyone ever says that, if you see that on a car, ask them, how do you support? Do you pay war bonds? Well, of course not. By the way, war bonds came back. Anybody? I want to see a show of hands. Who here has actually purchased a Patriot bond? Nobody. And you're at the epicenter of national defense. They came back after 9/11. Patriot bonds. Why would you have purchased them? Why would you have even heard of them? There was no presidential speech about them. There was no war bond rallies. And don't give me any BS about liberal Hollywood. Hollywood's just as conservative as there was liberal. Where was the Chuck Norris, Arnold Schwarzenegger war bond rally? Never happened. So you don't buy war bonds. You don't pay a war tax. We used to do that. We used to have a war tax. You go to war, you have to raise taxes. That's it. Not only did we not have a war tax, we cut taxes. A major tax cut in the middle of the war. Who does that? We did. So no war bonds, no war taxes, and not even a change of lifestyle. 15 years of war. When Americans are bleeding and dying in the Middle East, sales of gas-guzzling SUVs went through the roof. How does that happen? It happens when you completely decouple the cost and consequence and burden of war from the American populace. And that's the problem. That's where we are now. And so that seminal moment was not President Bush's speech. It's when somebody in a uniform had the courage to stand up to Rumsfeld and say, with all due respect, when he's like, well, America's at war. And he said, with all due respect, no. America's not at war. The American military is at war. America's at the mall. And that's where we are now. Every day you get up and lose sleep and churn stomach acid and risk losing your lives and limbs and minds and families to protect us. Well, we're at the mall, taking selfies and growing man buns and voting for a reality television star for commander-in-chief. A man who actually says we need to dip our bullets in pig blood. Now, he says a lot of stupid things. He loves to say, I went to the best school, I got words. I got the best words. Well, apparently the word he doesn't have is consequence. Because when he says things like, we need to dip our bullets in pig blood, and we need to kill the families of the terrorists, and, direct quote, we're going to blow the shit out of them, the consequences don't affect him. They don't affect his children. They don't affect his voters. They affect you and people a lot younger than you, stationed in Muslim countries where the terrorists have already told the local populace, America hates Islam. Now the terrorists don't even have to say that anymore. They can literally just pull these phrases and then just show it to the populace. Who's going to join the army? Who's going to want to do that? Who's going to want to put themselves in harm's way for a population that doesn't know or doesn't care, isn't willing to do anything? Because the real danger is, now that we've reached the present and we look to the future, when you have a population that is not affected by wars in any way, they therefore don't have to study the consequences. They don't have to know the names of the countries. They don't have to know why these people hate us. They don't demand to be educated by their news media. And why should they? It doesn't affect them in any way. And that's not half the problem. It's not enough that they're going to vote for politicians that are going to send you into combat more and more and more with harder and harder missions. If we keep worshiping at the altar of cost effectiveness, eventually someone is going to crunch the numbers and make a campaign platform of not paying for you anymore. And it's already starting. The last 15 years have seen the rise of what they call private contractors. Let's call them what they are. They're mercenaries, people who fight for money. And for the first time, they're starting to do your jobs. They're starting to do the jobs that are traditionally set for American troops. We all know that's wrong, but let's say it. Why is it wrong? There are two pillars of catastrophe with mercenaries. Yeah, they may be cost effective. There's no mercenary Department of Veterans Affairs that we have to keep paying for. And by the way, I'm just going to segue for a moment. You've got to take care of our veterans. You have to. And it's not just because it's the right thing to do. Veterans are recruitment tools either for or against. When I was a kid, the streets of my hometown of Santa Monica, California, were paved with Vietnam vets. And that's the message my generation took away from that. I don't care how many commercials we saw about being all you can be. You see someone thrown away by society in a cardboard box, you see that as the end of military service. And that's still with us today. I don't know if any of you watch the show Family Guy. Family Guy is one of those popular shows on television. And as I've learned from my father, comedy doesn't work if you don't know the context, if people don't get the joke. Well, there's a joke in Family Guy where they buy a huge new television set, and there's a huge cardboard box, and the baby crawls inside, and he goes, oh, look, I'm an Iraq war veteran. And then he looks in the camera and goes, oh, no, we're going to take good care of them. That's the narrative out there, that if you join the military, you're going to end up with PTSD, or losing limbs, or essentially just thrown away by society. So you've got to take care of these people. You've got to show the American people that you can come out the other side of military service in the same way that my father's generation did, productive and happy and going on with your life. But let's get back to mercenaries. What's wrong with them? Cheaper. They can go places that you can't. They can do things you can't. And that's the problem. There's no oversight and there's no rules of engagement. They can do whatever they want to whomever they want. And the people that they're doing it to, they don't know the difference between an American serviceman or woman and an American mercenary. They just see an American. And that annihilates our one advantage that we have over other world powers. You know, I've seen all these lectures over the last 2 days about the rise of China. You know, they've got more money than us. They've got more weapons. They've got better weapons. You know what they don't have? They don't have ethics. They don't have the notion that a Chinese-led world is a better world. They don't care about that. We do. Since 1917, we have had that basic fundamental right that when we put our boots on the ground someplace else in the world, it's to make it a better world for the people everywhere. Now, does that work all the time? Oh my God, no. Didn't work in Iraq or Afghanistan. Didn't work in Vietnam. Didn't work all of Latin America. But sometimes it does work. In 1939, the two most repressive, bloodthirsty countries were Germany and Japan. Now they're the two most liberal democracies. Why? Because of us. Because, yeah, we might not always live up to these ideals, but we're always trying to. And if you have a bunch of mercenaries replacing you, going around the world, doing whatever they want, those ideals are gone. Then we're just another big bully. No different than Germany or Japan or the Soviet Union, just waiting for some Chinese or Indian kid to just punch us off the playground. So that's one major problem with privatizing force. Another problem is, at the end of the day, mercenaries lose. And I don't mean the little dark shadows things that they like to do. I don't mean fomenting coups or assassinations. I mean those big stand-up battles when you need John Basilone, and you need Audie Murphy, and you need Colonel Chamberlain to lead a charge down Little Round Top with empty guns. That moment when somebody is going to put themselves in the fire, nobody's going to do that for a paycheck. Just ask the Hessians that we kicked the crap out of during our revolution. Ask the Serbian mercenaries that tried to prop up Mobutu Sese Seko. Ask the Carthaginians who stood outside the gates of Carthage facing Roman legions made up of Roman citizens fighting for something bigger than themselves. And that's the crossroads we're at right now. If we keep going down this road of self-interest and privatization, are you going to find yourselves nothing more than a feeder school for private armies? And it's already happening. Like I said, I don't speak for anyone. I speak for me. But one thing I have learned in my fellowship at West Point is that the big problem is retention. More and more cadets are graduating, getting their commissions, doing what service they can, and then jumping into the lucrative private sector. Is that what we want? Is that the goal for you, just to become Blackwater University? Or are we going to try to reverse this trend and try to heal this rift with the populace? Work on messaging, work on truth, work on engagement, and trying to bring us back and reconstitute what we used to call the home front. Will it take a long time? Oh my God, will it take a long time? You know, whenever I give this talk, I always hear somebody saying, well, how long is that going to take? I say, you know what? It took us half a century to get here. It's going to take us half a century to get back. Will it be hard? Wow. If you think any of the challenges that you've seen in the last 48 hours are hard, they are nothing compared to trying to re-engage the American voter. And that's what we have to ask ourselves. Are we going to stick with the status quo and just keep going down the path that's easy? Or are we going to remember what made us not just a world power, but a power that everyone wanted to come to? A power that leads the world because it's the right thing to do? Are we going to make the choices that need to be made? Not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. I don't know if you heard earlier when General Milley was here. He's a Princeton grad, and he was giving General Perkins a hard time about West Point. And so I went to City College, and on the wall of Hunter College it says, we may be of different minds or different opinions at different times. It's an Emerson quote, but may we always be on the same side of the truth. So first off, your speech was great. And there's not a question at the end of this soliloquy, but if you'll indulge me just for a second, what we try to do with mad scientists is entertain a broad range of perspectives. And I thought fantastic perspectives, because it was clearly not the kind of a conversation that we in the Army have on a day-to-day basis. Not saying that that's an Army position, and for those of you out in TV land, The
opinions expressed by Max Brooks are his alone.
But, exactly.
Moving on.
Exactly.
Moving on.
But I would tell you that you have earned, and Dr. Shalecki and lots of other folks who are not military or government civilians, when people ask you, what have you, I support the troops, what have you done? And you can say, well, I've participated in mad scientists or exercises. And mad scientists, the purpose of mad scientists is so that the Army doesn't end up in this echo chamber of people who always have the same opinion, that we're always talking to like-minded individuals. So, in fact, the reason we have mad scientists is so that we can hear a broad range of opinions. And the second thing I would tell you is when people say to me as a veteran, or any of you as a veteran, hey, I support you and thank you for your service, I would ask you to get them in touch with Kira, because what we are developing is what's called the Global Culture and Knowledge Network. So if you imagine the industrial, we had a picture earlier on in an earlier brief which showed Detroit in the 40s, where we went from making cars to making tanks and making aircraft. Well, if we are in an information age warfare, and knowledge is the key, how do we mobilize the knowledge of our nation to apply against the Army's next problems? Mad Scientist is part, but the Global Culture and Knowledge Network is designed so that people who would not ordinarily be bringing their talents to the Army, or knowledge which the Army needs for its next mission, which is not readily available within the Department of Defense or the intelligence community or the government, that we can reach into. So for any of you who are asked, or somebody says, hey, thank you for your service, put them in touch with Kira, the Global Culture and Knowledge Network. And for any of you who have participated over the last couple of days or previously, or our online sessions, I would say thank you for your service and for your contribution to helping the Army think more broadly. So thank you.
Thank you. That sounds better than it actually is, because my wife would be like, oh yeah, you did what you always do, you talked. Do we have questions? Can we get a mic to this guy?
So Max, some pretty sobering comments about the relationship between the American public and the military. I wish I could say you were wrong, but I think there's a lot of validity. Some very Clausewitzian overtones in that. But I wonder if you would comment on the role that the media plays in that relationship. And the traditional role of the Fourth Estate, and even you commented on the election and what Jefferson told us about the importance of an informed electorate. How's the media doing in this?
Terrible. No, I mean, look, this is a problem of worshiping at the private sector. We've made our media for profit. So therefore, ratings are the key. I encourage you all to see a very important piece of American history, Anchorman 2. And there's a wonderful scene where Will Ferrell, their ratings are down, and Will Ferrell goes, why can't we just tell the American people what they want to hear instead of what they need to hear? And the room stops, everyone's like, wait a minute, say that again. And that is the problem, where when we make everything for profit, then that becomes the only goal. And so then it becomes just about what bleeds and leads instead of what we need to hear. And there are things we all need to hear. I think also another big problem is, and I don't want to lay too much blame on the military, but you all have a stake in Hollywood and you don't even know it. Hollywood loves to make military movies, And they love to do it with military toys. Hollywood can't make aircraft carriers and giant fobs. They use real military facilities, and therefore there is a PR officer there to always look at the script and make sure like there's nothing defamatory. But that needs to be a real job, not just a censorship job. You know, somebody who's working in liaison with Hollywood needs to say, hey, can you just put one line in there about a soldier who beat PTSD? I mean, remember what I said before about the narrative of the crazed redneck that likes to blow things up? What nobody understands is that the Army is actually the most liberal organization in the United States. The United States Army racially segregated before the rest of the country. The United States military gave jobs to women before the rest of the country. The United States Army allowed people of any sexual preference the right to marry and be treated like human beings and full-class citizens before the rest of the country. Nobody knows that. Even now in this presidential cycle, we're talking about the difference in pay inequality. Female officers, you get paid the same as the dudes? Okay. Nobody knows this. Nobody knows outside the military that the military is actually more equal than any place else in the country. That is a tremendously powerful message. Other countries do a much better job. I watched a British Navy recruiting commercial when I was over in the UK, specifically targeting people of African descent. Anybody else see this one? They talked about the slave trade. And they talked about when Parliament abolished the slave trade, the enforcement of that was His Majesty's Royal Navy. It was the Navy that stopped the slave trade. And that was a very powerful message to people. So we can say, Navy, a global force for good. Okay, how? Show me how. Tell me what the Navy and the Marines and the Army are doing socially. And I think that is completely lost. Anyone else?
I have a question. So I'm Kira Hutchinson, and my mom and dad are streaming Mad Scientists right now.
Hey, Kira's parents.
And so my mom is a nurse. She worked at Veterans Administration for 25 years, and my dad is an electrician. And so they're really not military people. And I think that Mad Scientist is a way to reach out and talk to people. I know the people on their block always ask me what I do, and then I say, go to Mad Scientist, and you can see what I do. And they think it's neat. So how do I make this idea more sticky? And can I use Mad Scientist to reach out to these people? And how can you help me to do that?
Well, I do. Here's one thing the Army has actually already done and not even realized it, which is getting rid of Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Okay.
You know, getting rid of Don't Ask, Don't Tell allowed ROTC back on campuses again. And that was huge. When I did my ROTC, I was at Pitzer College in Claremont, this hippy-dippy liberal school. I had to go across the street to Claremont McKenna to do ROTC, which was already conservative, and so it was sort of a like mind. It was groupthink. You know, getting ROTC back on campus again allows different people of different mindsets to mingle. And I think that's extremely important, because that will help go a long way to getting rid of this narrative that we've created around the soldier. I mean, another thing, getting back to Hollywood, this is a big one. You know, if you went back to World War II and you didn't know about World War II, you just wanted to study it, and all you had were movies, you know everything about World War II. Even Vietnam. 15 years of war. How many movies have we made? 5? Who saw Good Kill with Ethan Hawke? Nobody. Who saw Eye in the Sky? Yeah. No, here's the movies that we all saw. We saw Hurt Locker, yes. War Junkie. We saw Zero Dark 30, yes. Pro-Torture, yay. And then we saw American Sniper. And here's the problem I have with American Sniper. And this is not against Chris Kyle, but when I see this 7-foot-tall elite Viking of a warrior, I think, that'll never be me. Why try? And this is a problem the military has partially done to itself. It's created this image of an elite fighting force which is better than anyone else. And the problem with that is when they're portrayed in the media, regular kids, regular young people look at it and say, well, there's no place for me there. And that's not what we saw in World War II movies. You know, there was always the big John Wayne guy who never fought. But anyway, there was this sort of the big dude, but then there was everybody else who looked like me, who looked like my dad, who looked like my uncles. You know, that was the citizen soldier. Now, basically, it's like if you're not from Krypton, don't bother. And I think we need to go a long way towards that. And I think the most important thing you can do, what I'm saying, is it comes back to veterans. You're not allowed to open your mouths when you wear that uniform. And that's a good thing. We did that for a reason. Plenty of countries where suddenly the TV goes off at 6 o'clock in the evening and somebody in a uniform comes on and says, "For the good of the people, we have taken over." And so it's good. It's good that you're silent. But the moment you take your uniform off, service should not stop. If we take care of our veterans, what we will be creating is a class of people who can talk about service intelligently and from personal experience. They can become teachers and college professors, and they can run for office, and they can even be actors. Audie Murphy became an actor. Not a good one, but we still saw him. We saw this little dude, and we're like, wow, George Costanza was a Medal of Honor winner. So I think taking care of our veterans creates a new class of citizens, and I think that's the most important thing we can do right now.
Max, are you familiar with the GI Film Festival?
No. I'm in Hollywood. I'm in all these things. Never heard of it.
I am in front of all these people. I'm recruiting you here and now. The GI Film Festival is in its 10th year. They just celebrated their 10th anniversary. It used to be just on the East Coast. It's at the Angelica Film Theater now. It used to be in Old Town. They also do a West Coast version in San Diego. Now, you said 5 films. This year alone, they screened 60 films
Never
to the
heard of
military. And what their purpose statement is exactly what you just said, to give a more fair and honest depiction of the military. The founders are a female West Point grad, Laura Law Millett, and her husband, Brandon Millett. They do a wonderful thing, but you just hit it on the head. Nobody sees them. And so maybe if you could help. Gary Sinise has been very supportive, and Lieutenant Dan Band kicked off this year's festival with a concert at the Howard Theater. But I would commend to everybody in here, and really every American, these are films that have a lot more redeeming value, and they do address things like PTSD in a very honest way that, you know, will never make it in mainstream Hollywood, but they're there, and there's filmmakers that care about this.
I think that's great. Let's talk after this. And I think that's another thing is veterans also have the ability to demand content from Hollywood. Now, 9/11 happened. Friends was the biggest TV show in America. Biggest TV show, which took place in New York. 9/11 never happened. It never happened. I looked at the top 40 hits in 2002, a year after 9/11. They had titles like "No Shirt, No Shoes, No Problem," "It Feels So Empty Without Me," and "I'm Feeling Pretty Good, Let's Keep on Dancing." So I think if you get a class of veterans who are educated and well-spoken and integrated into society, they can say, hey, where am I? Where am I in the TV shows? Where am I in the movies? Where am I in the songs? And I think that's another reason to take care of our vets.
From our online community, you mentioned vibrant response in defense of the homeland. Do you consider the homeland and a theater of war, and what keeps you up at night about the defense of our homeland from a military perspective? Is it just a logistics problems or a decoupling?
I'll tell you exactly. I'll tell you exactly what keeps me up every night. Self-divide and conquer. You know, time was an enemy would go into a country and invent divisions. You know, you're a Hutu, you're a Tutsi. You should hate each other. Well, we don't need that anymore. We're doing it to ourselves. Here's what bothers me, is when one of the people that I read constantly, and I read his book every few years because I'm always learning something, is Malcolm X. I think everyone should read his book because he's one of the most brilliant minds this country's ever produced. And he also reinvented himself twice. So as far as mental flexibility, we should all take a page from him. But when I heard that in Spike Lee's movie, you're not an American, you're an African that happens to live in America, that terrifies me. Because that's how you get homegrown terrorists. That's the problem in Europe. I've lived in Europe, I went to school in Europe, I went to the Film Academy at FAMU in the Czech Republic, and what I've learned is Europeans can be very tribal and not like us, to the point that, oh, come on in, General. Should I stand? I was just saying self-divide and conquer, that when you make divisions, you help the terrorists. In Europe, you have groups of people who will never be integrated into the local population because they're very tribal. Basically, you could live in France for 7 generations, but if you came from Algeria, you're an Algerian. And eventually, some young men will say, this is not my country. So if I kill people and blow stuff up, doesn't affect me. Which, incidentally, nobody really talks about. That's why the first generation of Taliban were so brutal when they came into Afghanistan in the 90s. They didn't grow up in Afghanistan. They grew up in refugee camps in Pakistan. So that wasn't their aunt that they were beating for showing her hair. That wasn't the Buddha that they played under, that they blew up. They were foreigners in a country. And that's the danger, is creating foreigners within our own country. So to be completely stoic and reserved, now there's a 4-star in, when I hear someone running for chief executive of the land saying that we need to take one group and essentially put a yellow star on them, nothing makes me angrier. That's how you shed blood in this country. That's how you divide and conquer us from within. That's what keeps me up at night. Because our greatest strength has been our inclusion. You know, every time we go to war against somebody, somebody always thinks, oh, they'll fracture. For a country that has a history of slavery, and genocide, and all the problems that we've done, all the blood that we've shed to our people, yet somehow we came out of this country with the Tuskegee Airmen, and the Harlem Hellfighters, the Navajo Code Talkers, the Choctaws before them, the Nisei 442nd, groups that should have no reason to even like this country, shed blood for it, including Captain Khan. So anyone who talks about self-divide and conquer, to me, earns my wrath. Any other questions?
Hey, Max?
Yes.
Oh, go ahead. I don't agree with you. If you've given a similar discussion with that American public, you know, not this audience, how did it play? What was the feedback, or what did you think?
Well, here's the part that is so upsetting is I always get huge applause, and this is Comic-Con. These are self-absorbed Game of Thrones watchers that society has given up on. You know, there's this narrative that, oh, millennials are all self-absorbed and they don't care and they want to contribute. That's not true. They've never been given the choice. The fault is not the millennials. It's their Gen X parents that haven't given them the chance. You know, there's something in our culture, in our Constitution, that makes us all want to contribute. I think there's something human. It's not an American value. It's a human value that people want to be part of something greater than themselves. And if you don't give them the chance, if you just tell them, pray, hug your kids, go to the mall, well, they'll do it. But if you say to them, here's what you can do, and it will be hard, people will do it. So I don't think the problem is the American population. I think it's a cowardice on the leadership class for not risking the chance to give them something to do with their lives that's bigger than themselves. Anyone else? Yeah. Oh, yeah, microphone.
Part of the power of your talk comes from presenting, underscoring the paradox that the most liberal organization in the country is actually populated by people who tend to say, well, yeah, wait a minute, actually you're right. In other words, people in the military tend to regard themselves more as conservatives than as liberals, and you've brought to light the paradox that actually in some sense we're more liberals. Where does the conservatism or the maybe that blindness derive from?
Well, I mean, I think that is, I think the divisiveness is cynical politics played by campaign managers to grab the spoils and divide us. Because I've always heard that the military is a conservative organization, and yet I've done a ton of book signings on bases. I'm not talking the officers, I'm talking the enlisted. I saw plenty of gay couples. I saw plenty of people of color, lots of people of color, plenty of people who were not Christian. I was on the USS Stennis, spending a night at sea aboard the Stennis, talking to the chaplain, and the chaplain said, yeah, we have chaplains of all faith. We even have a Wiccan. Who here knows what a Wiccan is? Yeah, it's like a druid. How come I don't see that portrayed in the media? Everybody is there, but that narrative has been allowed to be forced on it. I don't see any of these people at my book signings when I turn on TV. You know who I see? Arlie Ermy yelling at me. That's all I see. I've met plenty of deeply intelligent, deeply thoughtful, deeply sensitive Marines. But all I see is that guy calling me a maggot. That's it. And so I think it's time for the military, through its veterans, through its civilians, to reclaim the narrative of its own identity and not let outsiders tell their story for them anymore. Anyone else? What's, oh.
We have time, yeah.
All right, anyway, thank you very much. Thank you for letting me come. Oh, right.
So certainly want to thank Max for a thought-provoking discussion this afternoon. How we connect back with the folks that we support, showing them what we're for, not necessarily who we're for, but what we're for, and some methods to do that. So thanks for a very thought-provoking afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, General.
Welcome to being a mad scientist. You know all the deal about as fired up as you are, that thing's going to get white in a minute. And forever a mad scientist.
Thank you
General. Very much.
Thank you.